I wonder if Carlene's coming today. She's usually here. She was here yesterday. All right. Catherine, you want to go ahead and put up the slide presentation, please? Thank you.
We got an exterminator coming today. Yeah.
All right, ladies, welcome everyone. Glad to see everyone here this morning on this beautiful day. Enjoy it because it's supposed to rain tomorrow. But we need the rain. I'll never complain about rain ever again. We are going to be doing chapter 6 in our book, which begins on page 59. And we are going to be focusing on a map or a couple maps actually of the Middle East. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is our faith focus for chapters 46 through 51. It says, even in the midst of horror or tragedy, we want to know that God cares, that God is at work to bring renewal. We demonstrate God's hope and renewal as we practice mercy, justice, and compassion in all our relationships with others and with our world. Okay, so that's our faith focus. So let's go ahead. We're going to open in prayer. Morning. But I really wanted to put this one verse, Jeremiah 29:11. I actually Googled what was the most inspirational verse in Jeremiah, and this is what popped up, and I was like, yay, there's something happy. So Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And I really like that because, you know, as you read all of these chapters, it can kind of be a downer. So I wanted to start off with something positive. So if you'll join me in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, bless these women today as we study your word and always help us to see the hope in you. Amen. Yes. About the verse? Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Karen and I have a friend whose daughter she couldn't have children and she went through IVF many times. Anyway, she finally got pregnant. And then the little girl we thought was perfect. And then after she'd been here for a little while, she started having sleep apnea. And then all this, she just all of a sudden pass out. And so they went through years and years of tests. She had all kinds of horrible problems. They had the people from France. The best specialists ever. And they couldn't ever, she just had too many things wrong with her. And we always thought she's never going to make it. But that was her verse on her mother's website. And she's now graduated from high school. And we thought she was going to die as an infant. She's now graduated from high school and she's in college. And she still has major problems every once in a while. But she's doing great for what she has to work with. So I said, I especially love that scripture right there.
Well, that's wonderful. What a blessing to hear that this scripture, somebody was able to take to heart and make it their own like that. Yeah, that's amazing. All right. So this morning, we're first going to start off with Claim Your Story. And this is on page 59 of our book, if you have your book with you. But if you don't have it, it's okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this because there's a lot of reading in this lesson. So I don't want to bog everybody down, so I'm just going to read this first part myself. All right. In the account of prophet's call in Jeremiah 1, God speaks of the divine power over the nations and empires to dig up and pull down, destroy and demolish, to build and plant. Verse 10. In discussing this verse during the Bible study at my church, an impassioned argument once arose over the nature of sin and suffering in the world. So listen to these different point of views as I read, because you're going to have to talk about these a little bit. Okay. So focus. Okay. One participant holding fast to the concept of God's sovereignty maintained that ultimately God must be to blame for all that goes wrong in the world, and spoke of how troubling that was to him. Others emphasized human free will, defending God's good nature. The first speaker responded, as I see it, there are only two choices. Either God is in control or God isn't. How can God be God and not be in control? But if God is in control, why aren't things better? No, I can't see goodness in allowing to go on as they are. As we look around the world in general, we continue to wrestle with this question. Each week, there are headlines about murdered children, and domestic violence exists within all of our communities. Our neighborhoods are full of foreclosure signs as a result of a bad economy, and family after family is affected by layoffs or reduced salaries. Weather patterns seem to be getting worse, and more natural disasters coming all the time. There seems to be no end in hunger, poverty, and war around the world. So is God in control or not? For Jeremiah, the answer was definitely yes. He explained the evils in society as coming from the human heart. He justified God's actions against people as the deserved punishment for their sin. Ultimately, however, the prophet pointed to the sovereignty of God as good news. The God who judges is the same God who saves, and this God has the power to save without a doubt. In fact, this God is in control of all creation, that foreign nations will be used as tools for redemption, whether they like it or not. All right, so we read together the Claim Your Story. Here's the focus questions, okay? So the first one says, with whom do you identify most in the writer's Sunday school class and why? So after reading, and you might have to look back at them a little bit, which person do you identify with? What speaks to you, or how, or do you maybe don't identify with any of these people's thoughts on if God is in control?
Basically be in control or not.
Mhm,
And how does that work?
mhm. So number 2 says, have you ever had questions about why God allows bad things to happen?
Yes.
Remember, there was a book
Yeah.
about why bad things happen to good people. Yeah, I think it was a rabbi that wrote that book. Yeah. And how do you answer these questions? Especially, if you're talking with someone conversation, and, as a Christian, you want to kind of defend why you're a Christian, or tell them why, and then they come up and say, well, how do you explain why God did this? And, sometimes, I mean, it's hard for us to understand, let alone explain it to somebody who's a non-believer,
I was actually wondering why this first guy, I would look back and say, was this a discussion in church? Because the first guy, it says God is in control, so if anything, I should be talking into the thing.
Oh, here
Here
it
it
is.
is.
State your name.
I'm Ellen. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was actually wondering if the first guy was a follower. You know, I mean, why is he in church, or why is he not unchurched because he's so mad at God? Because God, if God is in control, then God is causing all this. So, I mean, why is he even in church? I would be, if that's where if that's where I were to stand, I don't think I'd be here, you know,
Yeah,
because it's
exactly.
hopeless. Yeah. That's a fickle God.
Mhm.
I think it's testing us. We'll never step up if he does it all the time.
Say it again.
That maybe we're being tested because we'll never do anything if God steps in and takes care of everything all the time. But we have to grow somehow.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't think God causes bad things to happen. It's either, oh, this is Ann. Which one? I'll let you guess. And northern accent. Wait, we're gonna have a fight. Anyway, God gives us free will. He gives everybody free will. And he does not cause bad things to happen. They may happen, but he doesn't cause them. He's just letting us mess up on our own.
So we, in our Sunday school class that Marie teaches, this is Laura, we had a conversation that's a little bit like this, because one person said that everything that happens is God's will. And I don't think so. I think things happen all the time that make God very sad. But he doesn't agree. He thinks God already knows that every choice you're going to make, and you know, if a baby gets shot in the head, that was pre-planned. So yeah, we just don't see eye to eye on that. You want?
This is Ellen. I like to say that God has seen the video. If he is timeless, he is before and after and future and history. And so he knows, but if just because he knows doesn't mean that he caused it. I mean, to me, free will is, you know, is the cause of all of this, you know, and free will. Love isn't love if it doesn't cost you something. And if it was all in his control, completely in his control, it wouldn't cost anything. We'd be puppets. Yeah. Yeah. Susan Mowdy says, he created us in his image and gave us choice. Yeah. So I think there's a difference between God's will, you know, and God already knowing what it was. Here goes Sandra.
I like to say, this is, Sarah. I like to say that, well, like a best friend, that he knows what we'll do. You know, it's like, you know, when there's always times where someone will do something. I knew you'd do that.
Mhm.
And that's God with us.
This is Peggy, and I don't think of God as testing us. I think of him more of a comfort, love, and as a father kind of thing. So, yeah, when we screw up and do the things we do because of free will, then he's there. for that, and he knows, like he said, he knows.
But we still have to wrestle with the world around us and what's going on in the world around us. We have to look at what's going on in Gaza and in Ukraine, and we see a lot of innocent people losing their lives or their home or their whatever. We still have to wrestle with those questions. But as Christians, we have to believe that higher power is going to work that out.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, I think we have to wrestle
Mhm.
sometimes with what's happening around us.
Well, I feel like with situations like that, with like Gaza and Ukraine, it points back to the free will of the Russians and the terrorists and that sort of thing. But my question is, um, free will has nothing to do with babies being born dead and things that happen that are not a result of free will at all, anyone's free will. How does how is that justified?
Can't answer that.
Don't know.
So the question, yeah, how is it justified if it means that it's fair? And, I think that a deal is that life, the way it's set up, and God did set it up for the possibility of shit to happen. I mean, it happens. That bumper sticker is a faith statement. Um, but the other thing is that God is always with us. And if nothing bad happened, now that's true that free will, side of free will, his accepting it and not just getting out of there, and the people that killed him, that was free will, self-justification.
Well, we have Christianity now.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that the deal is that God can redeem anything. And God knows suffering and allows suffering. And if we didn't have suffering, we wouldn't need God. I mean, that's how we find God.
Anthropologist Margaret Mead said that civilization began when the first person with a broken leg lived, if they survived. And they'd survive because the others of their kind helped them. And if that never happened, we would just be little drones in the beehive.
And the other thing is the deal about wounded healers. It's, as we heal from our wounds, we become wounded healers in Christ. And that's part of Christ's body, that is the church.
I think he puts everything in motion, sees, he'll step up, and if we don't, he'll intervene sometimes.
I think that God's will can be found in anything that happens, as we are humble and turn to God for help. God will ultimately use that. It's just that in that thing, you won't find God in it, to me, God's will is that there is grace and blessing and redemption. In that moment, you don't find it. Ultimately, God's will is that it's redeemed. Now, whether it's we have a part in that.
So I guess I'm thinking of people that are affected, like,
Oh, wait, here.
yeah. Cindy asked you a good question.
Okay, so at a funeral one time, somebody whose brother had been shot and killed by a criminal was saying, I don't understand why my brother had to die because it wasn't his time. Was it? I mean, it was evil. But I don't think that his brother getting shot, I don't think that was God's will.
But God's will can come out of that.
Yeah, I agree. But I don't think that everything that happens is God's will.
No, I don't either.
Okay.
But I think that God's will God can redeem anything, and that is God's will. It's always for good and for healing and wholeness. It can the putting back together is God's will.
But not necessarily the evil part.
The evil is not of God.
Okay.
So you're kind of saying that God's will isn't the cause, but the response. Kind of, am I? Yeah, that God, yeah, that ends.
Mhm.
In God's hands, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. So if we're turning to God, it will be redeemed. I mean, nobody wants to hear that in the moment, because it's unfathomable. But over time, God redeems it. Yeah. And so it's the response, not the cause. And that came from Catherine Caviz. Y'all didn't hear it online, but she was the wisdom there.
All right. So
We've gotten through 2 questions.
that's okay. Well, we're going to move along here a little bit. Why is my thing not turning? I'm going to turn it back on again. Okay. There we go. Oh, nope. There we go. All right. So, in all my searching and research in this was a very difficult topic. And you could probably spend a lifetime researching this topic. So I found this short little video by the BibleProject.com, which was free for people to watch. So I thought that I would show you this. It's around 7 minutes long, but it'll recap last week's lesson that Ellen taught. I went and watched your lesson online, so that yes, I love the spa kind of theme. But it kind of puts it all together, and it's amazing that in 7 minutes they can go through all of Jeremiah. But I liked it because it was it was to the point and educational. So if you want to go ahead and click on that, Catherine, please, and I will get the lights.
I don't think it was God's will that I fell because of pop.
The book of the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah was an Israelite priest who lived and worked in Jerusalem during the final decades of the kingdom of southern Judah. He was called as a prophet to warn Israel about the severe consequences of breaking their covenant with God through their idolatry and injustice, and he even predicted that the empire of Babylon would come as God's servant to bring this judgment on Israel by destroying Jerusalem, taking the people into exile. And sadly, his words became reality. Jeremiah lived through the siege and destruction of Jerusalem and witnessed the exile personally. Now, this book came into existence in a really interesting way. Chapter 36 tells us that after 20 years of Jeremiah's preaching in Jerusalem, God called him to collect all of his sermons and poems and essays and commit them to writing, which Jeremiah did by employing a scribe named Baruch, who wrote down and compiled all of this material into a scroll. Now, Baruch also gathered lots of stories about Jeremiah, and he linked all the pieces together. And so this is why the book reads like an anthology, a collection of collections. It's all been arranged to present this prophet as a messenger of God's justice and grace. So the book begins with God calling Jeremiah to be a prophet, and he's given a dual vocation. He will be a prophet to Israel, but also to the nations. And his words will both uproot and tear down, but also plant and build up. In other words, he's going to accuse Israel and warn them of God's coming judgment, but he also has a message of hope for the future. Now, this opening perfectly summarizes the first large section, chapters 1 to 24. It's a collection of Jeremiah's writings from before the exile. And the core idea here is that Israel has broken the covenant with God and violated all the terms of the agreement they made that are written in the Torah. And in a number of ways. They've adopted the worship of all kinds of Canaanite gods, building idol shrines all over the land. And Jeremiah develops the metaphor of idolatry as adultery, and uses the language of prostitution, promiscuity, unfaithfulness to describe how Israel has given their allegiance to other gods. Jeremiah also repeatedly accuses Israel's leaders. The priests, the kings, the other prophets have all become corrupt. They've abandoned the Torah and the covenant, which has led to a tragic result. rampant social injustice. The most vulnerable people in Israelite communities, the widows, the orphans, the immigrants, were all being taken advantage of in clear violation of the laws of the Torah, and Israel's leaders didn't even seem to care. So a classic place where all of these ideas come together is in chapter 7. It's called Jeremiah's Temple Sermon. The Israelites are coming to worship their God in the temple as if everything is just fine, but outside the temple they are worshiping other gods, and some were even adopting the horrifying Canaanite practice of child sacrifice. And so Jeremiah makes his very unpopular announcement. The God of Israel is coming in judgment. He's going to destroy his own temple and punish Israel by sending an enemy from the north. This is an army that God would allow to conquer Jerusalem, and as you read on, you discover he's talking about the great empire of Babylon. And so this all leads up to a transition in chapter 25. Israel hasn't turned back to their God, and so in the first year of Babylon's new king, Nebuchadnezzar, God tells Jeremiah to announce that the Babylonian armies are headed for Israel and all of its neighbors to conquer them and take them into exile for 70 years. He compares Babylon to a cup of wine filled to the brim with God's just anger at all of Israel's injustice and idolatry, and God will make Israel and the nations drink from this cup. Now, this chapter is key to the book's design because everything that follows is going to focus on Babylon's coming attack. First on Israel in chapters 26 to 45, and then on the other nations in chapters 46 to 51. The section about Israel first contains stories about how Jeremiah begged Israel to turn back, how he warned them right up to the last minute, but the leaders of Israel kept rejecting him. This section concludes with a large collection of stories about how Jerusalem was under siege and eventually destroyed by Babylon, and about how Jeremiah was persecuted all through that time and eventually kidnapped and taken against his will to Egypt by a group of Israelite rebels. Now, right here in the middle, in between all of these dark stories of disaster and judgment, is a collection of Jeremiah's messages of hope for Israel's future. So he picks up on Moses' prediction that after Israel had broken the covenant and gone into exile, see Deuteronomy 30, God would not abandon his people. Rather, he would renew his covenant with them and transform their hearts. Jeremiah develops this promise, and he says that God is going to one day inscribe the laws of the Torah, not on tablets, but rather on the hearts of his own people. He's going to heal their rebellion so that they can truly one day love and follow him fully. And so one day, Israel will return back to the land, and the Messiah from the line of David is going to come, and that's when all nations will come to recognize Israel's God as the true God. So these chapters are showing that despite Israel's apostasy, God is not going to let Israel's sin get the final word. Rather, his own faithfulness will bring about the fulfillment of his promises, no matter what. After this, we find the large collection of poems about how God is going to use Babylon to judge the nations around Israel. So Egypt, Philistia, Moab, Edom, Ammon, Damascus, Hazor. But then, surprisingly, the longest poems are saved for last, and they're about God's coming judgment on Babylon itself. So although God used this nation to execute his justice, God doesn't endorse their violence and idolatry. And so Babylon too will come under the standard of God's justice. And so Jeremiah denounces this nation's pride and injustice as well. Now, Babylon is larger than life in these poems, and it reminds us of the image of Babylon all the way back from Genesis chapter 11. Babylon has become the archetypal rebellious nation. In their glorification of wealth and war, God's going to give this nation over to its own destruction. The book concludes with a story taken from the end of the book of 2 Kings. It tells about Babylon's final attack on Jerusalem, how they destroyed the city walls and burned the temple and took the people into exile. The story shows how Jeremiah's warnings of judgment from chapters 1 through 24 were fulfilled. But then the chapter ends with a short story about the captive Israelite king Jehoiakim. He's heir to the line of David. And the king of Babylon releases him from prison and shows him favor and invites him to eat at the royal table for the rest of his life. And that's how the book ends. So it's a little glimmer of hope. And this recalls Jeremiah's promises of hope from chapters 30 to 33. God hasn't abandoned his people or the promise of a future coming king from David's line. And so while this book contains a huge amount of warning and judgment, the final words conclude with a note of hope for the future. And that's what the book of Jeremiah is all about.
How'd you like that? walk through the entire book.
The book of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a priest who had been
Exactly. Less painful. Yeah, he was fast though. You had to really keep up. All right. So in this lesson, it says that we should explore these Bible maps. So I'm going to read the Enter the Bible Story, page 60. But before I do that, let's take a look here. I'm going to hand out these maps, and I could not find a map, and you'll have to share. I only have 3 per table. I could not find a map that actually included all of these places that Babylon went in and took over. This is just a little one, but that's all I had that. So, and then the one that I really couldn't locate, well, I could, but it was very vague, was Elam. So the ones in here, does the pointer work on this or not?
Not sure. Yep.
Oh, is that you?
Yeah.
Okay, that's you. Okay.
You had the little red one was up there for a second.
Was it there?
Oh, it's running.
I don't see the little one. No, I don't think it's up there. So it's okay. I'm not far away. So I had to add a few names here. I added Egypt because, you know, it's that way. Kedar is right here. It's kind of southwest of Edom. I had to kind of read where these were, like kind of descriptions of where they were. And then, of course, these places are not in the exact same places today that they were back then because of invasions and things. And then Hazor is up there. So this was just one map that I found that had kind of close enough date, 733 BC, for Israel, Judah, and then the disputed extent of the kingdom of David. So, and like I said, what I added in red, these are approximations. They are nowhere nearly to where they should be on the scale of the map. So, I'm going to skim read this because if y'all have your books with you, does everybody have a book? Okay, so this starts on page 60, Enter the Bible, but it goes through page 66. So I'm basically going to skim read this, okay? Because it would take forever for me to read the entire thing. So we're just going to skim read. So on page 60, I will read that whole first paragraph. It says, in session 5, we saw how Jeremiah 1 through 25 lifted up Babylon as an agent of God's judgment against Judah. This theme continues through Jeremiah 45. Chapters 46 through 51 then shift judgments against the nations. Taken in order, these nations are Egypt, Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Syria, which they was called Damascus, and then Kedar, Hazor, Elam, and Babylon. And like I said, I never really found a really good place to put Elam on here. So Ellen, do you know where it was? And I even had my husband researching the maps, and he goes, you know, every author has a different opinion of where these places really were. You know, there's a few that are pretty rock steady, like where Jerusalem was and Damascus and stuff, and the rest of them are kind of sketchy on the maps. So the overall goal of these chapters is to point to God as an indisputable Lord of all nations and the whole of creation. We're not always told why these nations are being punished, only that God can and will bring judgment. In the same vein, these chapters are interspersed with promises of God's eventual restoration of Judah. So basically, the way that these were presented in Jeremiah are their oracles, they called them, okay, like predictions. So Jeremiah 37, 6-10 records how King Zedekiah sought an alliance with Egypt against Babylon despite Jeremiah's protests. And the oracles against Egypt begin with the reference of Carchemish, which was like their god, I believe their pagan god, the site of a divisive victory of Babylonia over Egypt. And it said that God will destroy the Egyptian warriors. Okay, so what you have to know a little backstory about this is that Judea got real nervous about Babylon, and they went and befriended the Egyptians and thought, oh, we're going to go to Egypt. They're going to protect us from these Babylonians and we're going to be good. Well, they thought wrong. Verses 13-26, the second oracle, it turns over to Egypt, gets turned over to Babylon as punishment for pride and bragging. And then the section concludes with a strong assurance that contrary to Egypt, God will save Judah. Echoing Jeremiah 30, 10-11, these verses promise a return to the homeland where the former captives will find quiet and ease. And then surprisingly, God also intends Egypt's restoration as well. So Egypt was forgiven for their attitude and being against God, but eventually he restored them. And this doesn't always happen with these nations. The second oracle, so here's Egypt down here, okay?
So,
Right down here.
yeah, go ahead and say what you're going to say. and
Okay.
then I'll-
So Egypt is down here, and then that's the first oracle against Egypt. Okay, so the Babylonians are sent to attack Egypt. And then the next one is Philistia, which is right up here. Okay, so this is the next oracle or prediction. What were you going to say, Ellen?
You know, the Old Testament understanding before Jesus, the understanding of God was that if you do, God will punish you. And yet there was this faithful, merciful God who ultimately would care for the remnant that would, you know, wasn't just completely bad. You know, they turned and came back. But I just want you to notice that all of this. So you see that deal about David, it's that green, it goes, I mean, all of that empire at 975. So it was all of that. And it was, you know, times were rocking. It was like they were very wealthy and you know, what was going on? They forgot God. That's what happens. We get complacent. We go to the spa. We spend, you know, 120,000 on a wedding. We, you know, I mean, all of that, and the power and money comes, and then the powerful get more powerful, and the classes separate. What does it sound like? Us.
1939.
Europe in 1939 and us now.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, you know, and the thing is, we go after our own, we forget God and we go after our own thing. So that's what all this judgment is about. And the thing about the other countries, they're all worshiping other gods. And it's not just that, they're treating people like crap. You know, the widows, you know, it's like this whole separation of society, and God doesn't have patience for it.
Yes.
Do we need to?
Yeah, here you go.
The question.
Yeah.
This is. So therefore I agree with everything you've said, and you know, God is our God of love and redeems terrible situations, and you know, he didn't sin. But does that mean we need to revisit our language of say this, because it's like, God said, okay, wrath, here I come, or is it just a natural result of man's inhumanity to man? Therefore, the strong nation's going to come through, or was it God saying, I'm going to allow this? Therefore, that would be, he would be allowing things to happen with us. Or I need to teach you a lesson, just like I needed to teach Israel a lesson. They're going to be punished. So it's just a curiosity question of the language we were using around the tables just a few minutes ago, and then the language being used about God's sending judgment. Right. So it was just how to tie the two together.
Well, it's Old Testament.
And I like the way you said that.
Yeah, it's Old Testament, and the perspective of the writers of the Old Testament is a human perspective, and they are and a perspective of trying to understand. It's the same thing as mythology, right? There's a God you make up a God that's gonna do this, okay? But here is this God that really is. So who is he and how does he work? We need to please him. We're not pleasing him. It's the same, humans trying to control the divine to get what they want. If I sacrifice my firstborn, then it'll rain and we'll have good crops because Joe did it for that God. So it must work for this God. You see what I'm saying? So that's the perspective they're coming from. Takes all of that time for God to teach them who he is. And then finally he has to send Jesus. Right. And so, I think that, the whole thing of God using the nations to punish, it's a human perspective. And, maybe it is what the people at that time needed to hear, because they're at a certain point in their formation, we're not at that same point now. It's like Katrina was because of the gays and the all the people on Bourbon Street, it was like, just no wonder Katrina, well, no. Katrina happened because there was a storm that came, and then we had not engineered the river quite right, and the dams broke and there. Yeah. And so, do I believe that God sends national judgment? I believe that we can hang ourselves, and that that the balance is when we are taking care of others, just like the guy who survived the first broken leg that, society is now civilized. The beginning of empathy. Yeah. So, I think it's us that does it, and evil and power craziness. But can God's will be done in it? Yeah. That's what we got to find. Oh, sorry.
And also Jeremiah, God sent Jeremiah, the prophet, to warn people.
Yeah.
But they continuously didn't listen to him, and they didn't, even after some of his predictions came to pass, they still didn't listen to them. And that was, poor Jeremiah is beating his head against the wall. Nobody's listening to him. They threw him in jail. They did awful things to him. They didn't listen to him. And he made a lot of sacrifices. He couldn't have a personal life because his mission was to preach to these people, and they didn't listen to it. So poor Jeremiah must have been extremely frustrated. So anyway, the Philistines were the next group. They were the sea peoples, and they were also, we don't actually know what happened ultimately with them. It says at this point, God is in control, And the text does not provide any additional real information about the destruction of Philistia, whether or not, God forgave them or they came back into power. It really doesn't say that about Philistia. And then the next one is Moab up there. And this one is right here. Moab is the next one that basically God uses the Babylonians as a tool. And sometimes, and this kind of sparked my interest. A lot of times these civilizations that are these armies are known as the destroyer in the Bible. They'll say sometimes they'll be referred to as the destroyer. And I thought that was interesting because I just finished watching a mini series on Moses on, I forget whether it was Netflix or something like that, but it was really good. And the destroyer was mentioned in that. And then I was reading Jeremiah and the destroyer was mentioned again. So we think, one of the things that got me thinking, Laura, when you said about God's will and everything, well, it's not really God doing it. And in the Old Testament, he used other civilizations or armies to do his battling or eliminating for him. And,
I think we're leaving out Satan, that there really is evil in the world.
there is, yes. But oddly enough, Satan's really not mentioned unless Satan is the destroyer. So. So anyway, with Moab was one of the smaller nations neighboring Judah. It was located across the Jordan. In Jeremiah's lifetime, the Moabites helped Babylon raid Judah. And Jeremiah included them in his prophecy, advising Judah and the surrounding nations not to rebel against Babylon, but to bring their necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and to serve his people. But of course, no king is going to want to become a servant of the Babylonian king. So that didn't work out too good for them. And the oracle begins with the language that we've seen elsewhere in Jeremiah. Moab will experience the consequences of God's judgment in the form of shame, desolation, great destruction, weeping, and anguish. And Jeremiah describes Moab as ruined or spilled wine. Then the surprising word of grace is that God also laments for Moab. So we get back to how God does get sad and is upset with what's going on. My heart wails, said the Lord in Jeremiah 48:36, verses 31 through 39. Describe how God intended good things for Moab and his anguish that they did not come to fruition. Out of grief and love after their punishment, God will eventually restore Moab in verse 47. So God feels for these people. I mean, Egypt was restored. He must have seen some glimmer of hope in these civilizations, these tribes, these early tribes, to have their livelihoods and everything restored. And then the next oracle against nations, these include Ammon, Edom, Damascus, Kedar, Hazar, and Elam. Ammon had been in conflict with the Hebrew people for ages. Like Moab, Ammon once helped Babylon attack Judah and later had been advised against joining Judah in its rebellion against Babylon. Ammon will eventually fall because it's God's will. This affirmation of God's power would be especially important to those in exile after 587 BC, because those deported to Babylon wondered if God was really in control after all. And this oracle pronounces a hearty yes. Okay, so they're reaffirming here, the author, that God is in control. And then when Jeremiah turns to Edom, a nation whose heritage traces back to Jacob's twin brother Esau, Edom is to be punished and brought down because of its pride and the way it terrorized others. Now it will become a wasteland, verse 17, instead of a high almighty bully. God will destroy the nation, leaving protection for only the widows and the orphans. Okay? Not the evildoers or the soldiers, okay? Just the widows and the orphan. And then they mentioned Damascus was not a major player in Jeremiah's time. And then Syria, like other nations, will fall because it's God's will. Kedar refers to the nomadic people in a remote area in the north portion of the Arabian desert. Kedar was the son of Ishmael. I don't know if anybody remembered that. Abraham's son of Hagar. Okay. So that was named after Ishmael's son. Hazor here is not a famous city, but it's located about 9 miles north of Israel. The people of Kedar and Hazor were not traditional enemies of Israel or Judah, nor are specific sins mentioned to regard them. The most we are told is that they live safely and in security. And then they also reference shaven temples, and in Jeremiah 49:32 indicates variance with Jewish law. So they didn't, they strayed away from the law. They may have followed some part of the law, but they were had variances within the law. There were no apparent reason for Babylon to campaign in this area. Scholars speculate that these nations were included to show the breadth of God's reach and control. And then the final oracle concerns the nation of Elam. This is the one I really couldn't find on the map. The oracle itself is very general and includes threats similar to those that run throughout the book of Jeremiah. Elam's future is in God's hands. That's what the text says. Elam could defeat Babylon. This oracle may represent a message from the prophet that Judah should not hope or expect to avoid God's plan for them. And then, of course, finally, the oracle of Babylon. Okay. Until now, Babylon has been presented as God's agent of punishment against Judah. Okay. This was his tool, this army, to go and attack, destroy, wipe out, depending on the circumstance of these nations. Babylon is about to be held accountable for its deeds, because Babylon was not nice. Okay. And that's probably why God used them as the destroyer, because they were horrible people. They're held accountable for their deeds, especially for challenging God and for arrogance. They were very arrogant. Babylon's defeat and Judah's restoration are intimately linked in these chapters, where we find them carefully interwoven. Babylon will be punished for plundering God's heritage. Babylon has held the people as slaves and refused to let them go. This is a lot like the Moses chapters, right? Where in Exodus, where Pharaoh refused to let the people go. The same thing with the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He didn't want to let the people go. Yet once God is done, the people will once more know God is their Redeemer. And then the final words of the oracle emphasize again that Babylon ruled under God's allowance and now will fall as God's will. The Lord who rules over nations and empires controls even mighty Babylon. And then I highlighted, this is probably like the message of all this. God is in control. God has a plan, and God is working things out despite all contrary human activity. These chapters invite us to trust God, even when it seems God is absent or powerless. To me, that summed up the whole thing, you know. But wow, I mean, this was a lot, like the battling back and forth. And it was like, I mean, just the years of unrest. I mean, this is the Middle East. The same things are going on today. You know, I've got some current events over there we're going to look at in a little bit. But, you know, this is just craziness. And then the one question with this part says, what thoughts come to you as you see these locations on the map? I mean, anybody have any thoughts about all of this invasion and going back and forth of who's friends with who and who's enemies and foes? Any thoughts about that when you see this map and all these different locations that were under invasion?
It's a lot of fuss over such a small piece of land.
It is.
So, you know, the realtors say location, location, location. It's a prize piece of land. There's, I mean, there is the desert, but that part of the Mediterranean, you know, a huge amount of trade, and that was the corridor between the north side and the south side of the Mediterranean. So everybody was going through there with their trade, and and then around Galilee, that area is just stunning. I mean, it just is so fertile, huge fertile area. Then you get into the wilderness.
Mhm,
But yeah, it's prize land.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, anything that has water and you're able to have crops and see all that beauty when you border those deserts.
It's the San
It-
Fernando Valley.
It is like the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's why it's so prized, right? Because it's beautiful. I actually got to visit Israel. I didn't go all over, but we went to like Jerusalem and Bethlehem, you know, kind of the typical places. But on the drive in, our ship was docked in, oh my gosh, what's the big port? Haifa. When we drove in, I was astonished to see how green it was and flourishing, because I expected it to be like, you know, riding through West Texas. You know, I was like, that was my expectation. You know, the landscape, you see a few cows every once in a while, but all looks like the same.
Piece of there.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
You always hear the land flowing with milk and honey.
Yeah.
In my mind, it's just all desert.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually surprisingly beautiful, and you know why they're fighting over it. So, all right, so the next thing here, we have some Bible reading to do, and if you can skim read or whatever, but I'm gonna have y'all listen to the very first chapter here, which is Jeremiah 46. So hopefully everybody can hear this. I'm gonna bring it over close.
Jeremiah 46. This is the word that came to Jeremiah the prophet concerning the nations,
Can you hear it?
concerning Egypt. This is the message against the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was defeated at Carchemish on the Euphrates River by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Prepare your shields, both large and small, and march out for battle. Harness the horses, mount the steeds, take your positions with helmets on. Polish your spears, put on your armor. What do I see? They are terrified, they are retreating, their warriors are defeated, they flee in haste without looking back. And there is terror on every side, declares the Lord. The swift cannot flee, nor the strong escape. In the north, by the river Euphrates, they stumble and fall. Who is this that rises like the Nile, like rivers of surging waters? Egypt rises like the Nile, like rivers of surging waters. She says,
Oh, I know.
I will rise and cover the earth. I will destroy cities and their people. Charge, you horses. Drive furiously, you charioteers. March on, you warriors, men of Cush and Put, who carry shields, men of Lydia, who draw the bow. But that day belongs to the Lord Almighty, a day of vengeance for vengeance on his foes. The sword will devour till it is satisfied, till it has quenched its thirst with blood. For the Lord Almighty will offer sacrifice in the land of the north by the river Euphrates. Go up to Gilead, get balm, virgin daughter Egypt. But you try many medicines in vain. There is no healing for you. The nations will hear of your shame. Your cries will fill the earth. One warrior will stumble over another, both will fall down together. This is the message the Lord spoke to Jeremiah the prophet about the coming of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to attack Egypt. Announce this in Egypt, and proclaim it in Migdol. Proclaim it also in Memphis and Tapanhes. Take your positions and get ready, for the sword devours those around you. While your warriors be laid low, they cannot stand, for the Lord will push them down. They will stumble repeatedly. They will fall over each other. They will say, "Get up, let us go back to our own people and our native lands, away from the sword of the oppressor." There they will exclaim, "Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is only a loud noise. He has missed his opportunity. As surely as I live, declares the King, whose name is the Lord Almighty, one will come who is like Tabor among the mountains, like Carmel by the sea. Pack your belongings for exile, you who live in Egypt. For Memphis will be laid waste and lie in ruins without inhabitant. Egypt is a beautiful heifer, but a gadfly is coming against her from the north. The mercenaries in her ranks are like fattened calves. They too will turn and flee together. They will not stand their ground, for the day of disaster is coming upon them, the time for them to be punished. Egypt will hiss like a fleeing serpent. As the enemy advances in force, they will come against her with axes like men who cut down trees. They will chop down her forests, declares the Lord. Dense though it be, they are more numerous than locusts. They cannot be counted. Daughter Egypt will be put to shame, given into the hands of the people of the north. The Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says, I am about to bring punishment on Ammon, god of Thebes, on Pharaoh, on Egypt and her gods and her kings, and on those who rely on Pharaoh. I will give them into the hands of those who want to kill them, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his officers. Later, however, Egypt will be inhabited as in times past, declares the Lord. Do not be afraid, Jacob, my servant. Do not be dismayed, Israel. I will surely save you out of a distant place, your descendants from the land of their exile. Jacob will again have peace and security, and no one will make him afraid. Do not be afraid, Jacob, my servant, for I am with you, declares the Lord. Though I completely destroy all the nations among which I scatter you, I will not completely destroy you. I will discipline you, but only in due measure. I will not let you go entirely unpunished.
So I thought that was interesting how God said he would discipline them, but not completely destroy them. All right, so we're going to read the following chapters and break up into groups. So online, I have you all reading 47 and 48, okay? And then group 2 is here, if you would read 49 and 50. And then group 3, you just get 51 because it's really long. So I'm going to give you about, probably about maybe 8 minutes to read those, and then we'll come back together.
I can start reading.
How do you want to do this?
Oh, sorry, I forgot about the recording. Okay, so I was originally going to put you in groups to have some discussion, but for the sake of time, I thought we should all, as one big group, talk about these. The first question says, what challenges you or makes you curious about the scripture passage or passages? What makes you curious about?
Yes,
Red?
there was,
anything?
I mean, it was talking about that this is the destruction of Moab, and although there was, I think, 87 pages worth of destruction of Moab, it also mentioned a whole bunch of other very hard to pronounce places. So it wasn't just Moab that God was declaring to be destroyed. But what made us the most curious was chapter 48, verse 6, where it says, Flee, run for your lives, become like a bush in the desert. And we were curious about how bushes in the desert run.
I remember reading that part too, and I was it made me think of the movie Back to the Future where
Yes,
that-
make
that
like
one-
a tree and get out of here.
make like a tree and get out of here. Yeah. I thought of the same thing when I was reading. It was a little bizarre.
Yes,
My
exactly.
version is hide in the wilderness.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have a question about it until Heather read that, and I thought, got thinking.
Exactly. Anybody else have anything that popped out? What did you say, Judy? Okay, I'll say.
Well, Judy was looking at the different countries that two of the countries were kind of founded by the Lot, well, one's Lot, Lot's daughters, and then from Lot's daughters, and then countries that were from
Lot's- so
Ishmael.
Two of the countries were formed by Lot's daughters. And then Ishmael.
Ishmael,
Okay.
yeah, and then you said the what Esau, yeah.
Esau.
Yeah. So, so it's just kind of weird. These are countries that should have, they were part of that family group. So you would think that they would be, amenable to those country,
Mhm.
Yeah. It's like they're not acting like family. Well,
Yeah. So what do these chapters say? What does it say to you about God? We kind of talked about the Old Testament God versus the God of the New Testament.
he's all powerful for sure.
All powerful, yes. And I think that kind of leads into number 3, where it says, what feelings or thoughts do you have about the way God is portrayed in this, the scripture that you read? Ellen.
Thanks. I have a problem with it. Yeah, vengeful, destructive on a mass scale. I believe God to be a personal God, that is redemptive, especially, I mean, it is what we know through Jesus. And they didn't know that. And they were trying to describe, and justify and put into, make sense of what is going on. And I do think that God speaks the language of the people at the time so they'll hear him. And that's why Jeremiah is saying this, because they'll listen and maybe they'll turn, but yeah, I have trouble with, I don't believe that God crushes nations. I believe that we could certainly do it ourselves. And that there is such thing as being faithful as a nation. But that means that things are going to go better in that country if you're faithful as a nation. I don't believe that nations are tools. Yeah.
So the one thing the one verse that I wanted to read, because only group 3 read this one, unless you did your homework. I'm not judging. So Jeremiah 51 verse 62 says, then say, Lord, you have said you will destroy this place so that neither people nor animals will live in it. It will be desolate forever. And this is Babylon, okay? And this is the same piece of property that back in the 70s, Saddam Hussein tried to build a city there. I don't know, does anybody remember the history? Because I had kind of forgotten about this, and as I was doing the research, I looked it up. And then I was asking my husband about it. I said, do you remember when Saddam Hussein built? He goes, yes, it was supposed to be like resorts and hotels and building all this place up. And it was, of course, you all know what happened to Saddam Hussein back in the 70s. He didn't make it, neither did the city. So really, it is testing true to time that Babylon is not thriving, just the opposite. It's not. And so that I found pretty interesting because, you know, you always wonder, like, you know, you hear a lot of the stories of the Bible and you know, you're like, okay, well, you know, is there scientific proof behind this? Is there geographical proof behind it? Well, that really jumped off the page to me when I read that. And then I looked up a little bit of the history of that area. So it was really kind of interesting. The next thing are some news events. I have this lady out here reading the paper, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm going to drop off some of these newspapers, just take a glimpse at the headlines. Okay. And I want you to see if you can kind of have any kind of correlation between what do you think Jeremiah might think to address the events in the stories that we see in our headlines today. So I'm going to just give you like 2 minutes to just look at some of the headlines. Some of you probably saw news feed this morning and don't need to look, but just take a look and we're going to try to come up with some kind of correlation between today's events and the events of Jeremiah. I actually had to ask a neighbor to save papers. for me because we don't get
That's pretty impressive.
Some people like that physical paper.
Take on the world.
Oh, really?
What does your newspaper say, Ann and Melanie?
All right, everybody find their shocking headline. So what do you think Jeremiah might think to address the events in some of these stories or headlines? What would his advice be on what we see? Where's our little?
Here it is.
It may not be in there, but you could mention it.
Yeah, this is Sandra. Not in the paper. We had our Gateway of Grace teacher appreciation yesterday. So I was talking to Samira. We've been trying to get, Samira has a Grace Community Church that she's formed because there were lots of folks that were becoming Christians. And so a lot of these people from Iran, and they've back home. They've been here. And this has been going on, you know, I asked Bill to be on this team to help get people. There's this Welcome Corps group that's from Canada originally, but they're opening up and helping people get over here. And so I was asking Samira, it's like, I haven't heard anything about this lately, you know, what's going on. And she said that a lot of these people, you know, all that area, you realize how close everything is to each other. You know, they've gone from Iran, they're in Turkey trying to get away. And right now, Turkey is not allowing these refugees that are probably not in good places there, you know, it's Turkey, and you know, it's the Erdogan people are in charge of just one, you know,
You're cutting
on.
out for us.
Sorry, I feel like I've got this right up to me. So, I'm just talking about, yeah, the people in charge of these, crazy. But that's,
No.
I mean, you would not see that in the paper.
Well, and some of the countries that want to actually help the refugees that have set up tent cities, and they're not getting any support from other countries, so they can't do
Yeah.
it themselves. And all they're asking for is help, so it's kind of a no-win situation, you know?
Right. So that's my 2 cents.
So how do you think God might be at work in these contemporary events that are going on? Or is God in working at all? Is he observing like he did in Jeremiah's time? Is he waiting for the moment? I mean, you know, where is our prophet? Do we need a prophet? Do we need somebody to tell us what Jeremiah told us?
Would we believe a prophet?
Would we believe a prophet, or have there been a lot of false prophets maybe that, you know, we're so leery of today of being confused by a false prophet?
So in my story, there are, you know, this Welcome Corps group is doing, they were in the paper. I looked it up because Samir wanted to know. They were in the paper, I think it was April 29th, whatever that Monday is. And they are doing, you know, they're getting people in from some places. It's just, I mean, when they can. So, you know, they are working where they can.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
At least there's some hope and progress going on.
And I think the presence of God is in smaller, or it seems like smaller groups. I think a lot of the war is due to evil, personal want for power and those things.
Mhm.
Okay, just a comment on situation. Before 9/11, the Iranian Christians would go to Mexico and come across that border. But after 9/11, I mean, they closed that border completely, because like it used to be, you could go to Big Bend and take a raft over to Mexico to eat. But after 9/11, it all stopped. I mean, that was very casual. It wasn't. But because that's what a lot of the people that were coming here from those Arab countries were Christians, just trying to escape, you know, where they lived.
All right, well, we don't want to spend too many time on current events because we could talk all day on these things, but your comments were much appreciated and very valid. And I guess, do we see a correlation between what's going on today in our events? You know, you turn on the news and, you know, there's always something happening that is destructive, not good. You know, can we compare these to the events of the fall of Judah? Have people forgotten God's covenant? I mean, even in Israel, there's a very small percentage of Jews that are actually practicing, which I found astonished when I heard that. I don't know what the number is. I don't want to quote anything, but it was surprisingly small, like under 50%. And I thought to myself, wow, that's sort of scary. You know, how do you fight for a piece of land when you're not even respectful to the God who gave you the land, you know? So it's kind of scary.
Thank God for what they want.
Exactly. Political. So this last
Barbara has
part,
something.
oh, I'm sorry, Barbara.
Human beings want authority rules or something that they can count on to be the rules.
Mhm.
And they often give power to very flawed people to try to get that. And then they have to rebel. And it goes in cycles over and over and over again.
Mhm.
We've surprisingly had fewer wars this century than we had in the previous centuries.
Mhm.
There've been little skirmishes where 5,000 or 6,000 people died rather than 600,000.
Exactly. So this last part, live the story, basically says that, and I'm not going to read it all word for word, but I'm just going to read bits and pieces. This kind of relates to, what we can do today to keep God's covenant. And this person talked a little bit about a parish in Mississippi. Despite the poverty of the area, the many reasons to give up on trying to make a difference, each person in the church, lay and clergy alike, contribute his or her gifts to ministry. Among the programs established and maintained by the congregation are teaming volunteers with lonely people in nearby nursing homes, sending needed items to children in Mexico, operating a Meals on Wheels program, supporting a community garden to help combat hunger, and then just all kinds of ministries. And then, so these are the questions here. One, how can your congregation offer hope and renewal to others? What are we already doing and what else might we do? And I'm going to skip to this next slide here. So if you, on the left, I thought we could just make a quick list, kind of list the things that we're already doing here as a church, and then brainstorm on some ways in the future. So I started off with Austin Street Shelter, and then I thought blessing bags. Catherine, would you mind typing on there for us so we can just kind of brainstorm a couple of ideas, please?
I would love to hear all this. It sounds fascinating, but it is already 11:40.
Yes, I'm sorry, we went
we
way
haven't
over. There was a lot of
done-
good conversation.
Yes. Well,
So,
unfortunately, I have to go to my other Bible study,
well,
but
thank you for joining us, Heather.
thank you.
Bye-bye. Take
Sorry I
care.
couldn't stay till the end.
No worries. Thank you. Bye-bye. So, Catherine, if you want to type blessing bags under Austin Street Shelter, and then, what are some of the other things that our church does? What are Gateway of Grace?
They're in the new mental health.
Strive, is it Strive Thursday? Strive Thursday?
Having the actual, counseling.
Mhm.
Meals on Wheels.
Meals on Wheels.
Network.
Otto Middle School.
Network.
Network,
Yeah, true love.
True Love Church. What did you say? Oh, okay. So, and we do many, many more things than this. I mean,
Counseling center.
yeah, counseling center. Mhm.
Yeah, Alzheimer's support, Alzheimer's caregiver support.
Mhm. You're gonna make her spell Alzheimer's.
COUNSELING.
The Alzheimer's support.
Just put ALZ.
Yeah.
Well, AA meets here, it's different, yeah.
And scouting groups that need.
Boy Scouts.
Alzheimer's, just, yeah, caregiver support.
And then let's move over to the other side where it says, is there anything that we could work on as a future ministry? Anything maybe that maybe your committees that you're on or whatever are talking about, things that you'd like to start, things that you're passionate about?
Left out Malawi.
Malawi, VIP. Yeah, you can put VIP on the other side. So,
I think there's always stuff brewing.
mhm.
Dementia, like Dementia Dallas is, something that the deacons maybe end up doing for knowing and caring, like just focusing on how to help dementia.
Okay, so that's a group, Dementia Dallas. Okay.
One time we did Feed My Starving Children. In the past, we've done that, which might be something I might want to
Feed
do.
My
again.
Starving-
That
Feed
was
My
a very
Starving Children?
satisfying
Okay.
experience.
I think also inside this building, so to speak, is ministry to our youth.
Mhm,
Whatever their ages, especially those children, like high school.
mhm.
Programs for them are
Right.
Children and youth,
Yeah, children and youth.
We still have divorce counsel.
And then maybe we can just say outreach kind of in general. I mean, thinking of new ways to do outreach.
Just
So,
Well, that's all our implementation team is working on those kind of things, right?
connecting with our community.
Yeah.
Community
Yeah.
engagement.
right, community engagement.
I think further and
Mm-hmm. Furthering Matthew 25 initiative, or just, you can put furthering Matthew 25. You don't have to spell initiative. All right, okay, let's go to the next slide. This is going to be our closing prayer, but before we do that, Anne, are you going to be able to do joys and concerns?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect, thank you. So let's start with, I think you're the only one left online. Did Heather email you or text you or anything?
Not that I know of.
Okay. All righty. So let's go ahead and start over here. We're